Hello, and welcome to these messy film reviews. I've already got like a mint in my mouth, so it's starting off real messy. But anyway, today we're going to talk about Prozac Nation. After reading the book, after Elizabeth Wurtzel, who this is like sort of her memoir is based on. Christina Ricci's in the movie. It's a very good book. Movie, it's like fine. It's not like the best movie of all time, but it's pretty all right. I've seen worse movies. It starts off with like sad, somber, yet kind of cool music. She's a big Springsteen fan. And then I wrote this note that was like relaxing about the typing in letters. And then I clarified for myself, thank you, past me, that the intro was kind of slow, but it makes me feel relaxed. And then there's Bon Iver playing, which is, sold on me. I love hipsters. Or maybe it's a Bon Iver feeling that is occurring, like how you feel when you listen to Bon Iver, that kind of like relaxed, but there's like weirdly anxiety and tensions and stuff. Anyway, she comes from a divorced family. Her dad was not there, but her mom became very involved. She said her depression started when she got her period around, which is very, very interesting. I definitely recommend this book called Hysterical, which is kind of about like the effects that hormones have on our mood, etc., etc. Anyway, she had a very tough adolescence, which might have been caused that she would put the stereo right up to her ears. That's not great. I was not in love with this child actor, but I understand the sampling was probably even smaller than it was back then, and it's a hard part for a young person to play, and you have to have somebody to allow this child actor to cut their legs on film and portray something kind of dark, so I'm sure it's got less, like, sampling of kids than, like, every kid that wants to be on Disney Channel. So her parents fought over her. She's, like, super tiny. And when she was 17, she got published. Then her mom is like, the most important day of her life is moving to college, and her mom believes that when she got married, it was the worst day. I don't think she's totally wrong. But anyway, Elizabeth Wurtzel got into Harvard on a journalism scholarship. She wants to be a writer. The first day, she makes a bunch of friends, which she says become harder to keep as she gets more into her own trauma. Her mother relationship wasn't as relatable to me personally. I also believe that she doesn't have to go to Harvard to become a writer. My mother and I's relationship, kind of backtracking, doing a lot of things at once today, but my mother wasn't as much of a go-getter and so involved in my life as Elizabeth Wurtzel's mother is, so that's just like an interesting concept for me, but I'm sure that this might be relatable to some people. I think this is how some people's moms are. And Elizabeth Wurtzel, she starts to kind of get some anxiety, and she's thinking of like backing out at the last minute, which is not great. And she just panics that her like whole life is ahead. And her and her mom are pretty codependent, so she might be freaking out about like the separation and kind of figuring out who she is and having to deal kind of with the trauma of her parents' relationship on her own finally, because for a while she's just been like relying on her mom. So she starts to isolate because she's just dealing with a lot. And Elizabeth Wurtzel kind of feels like she can't talk about her suicidal struggles to everybody, so that's kind of also why she isolates. She just doesn't belong because, like, who can relate? And that's something I think she really wants to talk to. And at her time period, like, nowadays therapists are very available at colleges, and back then it's not so easy because she feels like most people haven't ever even thought about suicide, although a lot of people, when I've talked to them about it, believe that, like, oh, like, I haven't really met a person who hasn't at least considered suicide, but they just, like, maybe there's somebody out there who hasn't, and maybe they're in denial, who knows, but maybe to question one's existence and one's responsibility to remove their existence. Is that like a natural part of the human condition, or just truly like a sick brain? Anyway, Elizabeth Wurtzel kind of idolizes cool things. Like, she feels like Bruce Springsteen and like some of these other like artists are the only people who get her because she can like hear the pain in their voice. Such a young person thing to do, I say, at 25. I'm almost 26 though, so I'm getting old. And her father kind of puts all these ideas in her head that her mom is overbearing, which I'm kind of a little bit more likely to take the mom's side, because it's like, why is the child living with the mom then? And it's like her dad was neglectful, her mom's overbearing. Her mom will like give her money, but there's no trust, because her mom's like super worried, because her mom is also separating from the codependent relationship and figuring out who she is in the first time without her like daughter. But Wurtzel feels like she doesn't fit in, that she's so strange that she feels like a stranger. And it's very odd to me because she does have like a lot of friends, so she definitely isn't based in a reality. And I feel like too, when you are feeling suicidal, if you're not feeling that you're getting the things you need from your current friends, and you're feeling suicidal, you're not going to really make other friends, because you're like, I might exit this earth. So there's this really cool shot of crowds speeding up, which I think is also indicative of like this time of where you feel like, oh, you're taking the time and learning new things, but really you're going so slow, it feels like. And everyone around you is like got their life figured out going fast. And those are very real feelings. She's spending some of her money on smoking, and she is having a lot of like low self-esteem, even though she has people who support her and think she's cool. Her friends are kind of a bunch of literary freaks, beautiful, dark, sexy, serious. I think at one point she throws, at least in the book, a party for losing her virginity, because she's so edgy, you know. And I think Wurtzel too has feelings of bisexuality, but due to the time doesn't really label it as such. Because she talks about her one friend about if she was a dude, she would be perfect. And of course they include that in the movie, because I feel like movies love the college lesbian sexual fantasy. I just love it. I love that time of experimentation and the gay agenda, I guess, you know. At times this movie felt a little male gazy to me. Although, honestly, in reading the book, she is very damaged in that way. Like, this is like a daddy issues book, and I don't want to like trivialize it by saying that, but that is where it feels like a bunch of her weird beliefs come from, because a mom who's working to support, like, I mean, you just can't do it all. You can't. That's why it takes two to make a baby, because it takes two to raise it, but we've forgotten about that. She's like discovering too that like there's people that she idolizes being subjected to electric shock therapy, and there's this weird like romanticization of mental illness that goes on, and she kind of justifies that like, oh, it's okay to feel the suffering because it will lead to art and success. And it's like, I don't think you have to feel this shitty to have art and success. I honestly think they get more in the way. But knowing that these feelings are sometimes a part of life and being able to work through them that way, and that working through them leads to a better survival, is like a better way to heal. But she doesn't really get that, and, you know, is just a fan of the Velvet Underground. And she just is like super lost in music. She smokes like so many packs of cigarettes when she's writing, and she just feels so cool. So it's definitely like a Tumblr aesthetic sort of going on. She does ecstasy and acid. She starts experimenting with drugs, which I don't think help her. She's like licking fingers of boys. It's so funny because it's like when you're depressed, you're like, I'm so unlovable. And then it feels like I know so many depressed people, and when I was super depressed and struggling with anxiety, it was crazy because it was like, that is when I felt like I attracted the most like romance. Like if I was single and sad, it was just like, maybe it's because it was easier to date because I like just didn't care about life. And when you're like passionate about life, you get a bit more picky about things. Anyway, she starts writing her music review and bonds with people on ecstasy. I was actually made on ecstasy, and I guess it's supposed to like help people bond very well, and I just bond naturally. It's because I've had it running through my veins as a fetus. Although the doctor said that it wouldn't hurt me, but I also am like, it was Texas. Did they want abortion laws? Who knows? I do think that the drugs for Elizabeth Wurtzel's character made it worse. And weirdly, I think at times they made things easier for her because it seems like she doesn't bond with people. Like that really reminded me of my mom. Like she can make all of these friends, but she doesn't really seem to care all that much about them. And when I say drugs, I also mean like drugs just as a prescription too. Like I don't know. It seems like in this, prescribed drugs helped her a little bit more, but I still think you have to be careful because, I mean, a drug prescribed is like a little bit easier because you've had somebody who also like took a look at your body and decided this, but you can still abuse your body on prescribed drugs because I don't know if you noticed, doctor visits are surprisingly quick, and I don't get examined every time I go to the doctors. They just kind of decide. Everything is a gamble in health, and it's rough, especially mentally. But yeah, no health is like an exact science. I mean, obviously you eat better, you exercise, you do things that are good for you. Those things are always going to help, but you know, every human being is uniquely made, which is amazing. I think too, what gets in Elizabeth Wurtzel's way is that she has a lot of expectations, which having expectations is good. It's good to have boundaries. It's good to know what you're passionate about, know what your goals are, have, you know, expectations for people in your life. But I do think that it can lead to depression because then you're not always, if the expectations aren't met, you're more disappointed. And I don't know, I think you can get like very controlling. And Elizabeth Wurtzel just kind of feels like, oh yeah, these people want to be with her, but they don't like need to be with her, which I think is just like a lot of people in college. It doesn't feel like, especially because college is such a like, usually you go away from home and then you're just planning on either returning home anyway to be back by your family, or you're going to move on from there. Like usually you're not going to live in the town that your college was in. I think that's more rare than normal. So she's feeling lonely. She also feels like while other people aren't living up to her standards, she's not living up to even her own standards. And she just feels drained. And she still like finds enjoyments in like partying and stuff, because I think too, people usually are like, when people go to a party, especially in college, it's like they want to bond with people. They want to have these experiences. They want to blow off steam. And I think for her, she like likes that so much that it brings on the depression of like, oh, I want life to be like these party moments all the time. So then she starts to want to be alone because I don't think she can take that disappointment or withdrawal. She's like addicted to the feeling of being loved and adored by other people. Don't I know that vibe? Yeah, I couldn't decide if she was an introvert or an extrovert because it seemed like she always wants to be around somebody, which is extroverty, but she tends to isolate herself. And when she isolates herself, she gets some work done because people can be distracting. But that's what makes me think she's an extrovert, because she's just so engaged in people. Then we meet Rafi, who I love. He's also the guy from American Pie, which is very, very funny. This was like, I'm done with comedy and I'm going to do a drama. And I love when actors do that. I love it. Just fucking live your life. Elizabeth Wurtzel decided that she was basically just saving herself for Lou Reed. Sexually, he was also, I think, going through electric shock, and because he was like addicted to heroin or whatever. And Elizabeth Wurtzel just basically believes like Lou Reed is the only one who understands her, and she understands Lou Reed so well. It's super fangirly. I don't know that I have ever felt this way about fiction, but we all know that there is mental illness going on in this movie. And then there's like kind of this like awkward sex scenes. Although honestly, with a mental illness, sex is always, I feel like, a little bit awkward. Honestly, sex even without mental illness can be awkward. It's such a weird act. Sometimes the sex scenes here kind of seem like porny, and I think there's part of this like gritty realism, which honestly it like is in the book, but it's not. Like I don't remember her going into like great sexual details in the book. And you know, films are like, naked skin sells. Elizabeth Wurtzel kind of gets like afraid during sex, I think just because of the vulnerability. And I think when you're feeling so crappy about yourself, it's really like, you know, sex is really intimate, so it's hard. Because I think she just gives up her virginity pretty quickly to somebody she doesn't care about because she just, like, wants the pressure off of it, which I kind of understand. Because it's like, as a woman, you're just sexualized. And I feel like as a virgin, you're, like, super sexualized. And it's just, like, I think there's like choices of like you either want to be really special or you just like want it over with. But it's very funny because she's like, she doesn't feel like losing her virginity is that big of a deal, but they threw this big party for it anyway. And yeah, they really play up the sex in this movie, which is so not what the book is about, but you know, film. And then in the movie, her writing, and it could just be like the delivery of the lines, but her writing, I don't think is as good as the book's writing because she's very, very good. But it's very hard because her like, I don't know that her writing in the book can translate to film because it is very like introspective and long. And I was very influenced as a writer from her. But anyway, she believes that like, you know, having sex, that's like normal for 19. And so they do all these like party invites and it's like a lotus flower because of like a deflowering. I honestly wish that having a deflowering celebration party of losing your virginity was more common because I think it puts more things in girls, and that even if it was like bad, you could like focus the party on that. I feel like this should be more common. Not everybody who got these invitations for the party was pleased, but I love this idea of that. I don't know. I just think it's really fun and could make kind of an awkward situation or a mid situation or a disappointing situation or even a great situation even better. So we got Elizabeth Wurtzel dressing like Madonna. I love it. But she is like this in the book. This character is just kind of an asshole. She's just like very emotional, very out of control. I don't think the movie captures it as interesting, but even in the book, I don't know. She's just like such a scumbag asshole that it's like hard to like her. So I think Ricci was like good casting because I feel like Ricci does have this like, she can be fucking the worst person ever and you're still drawn to her. And yeah, a lot of people got mad, especially the guy who deflowered her, because he was like, you turned like the private public, and she just kind of like doesn't understand. I like kind of understand that, but it's like, she owns her own virginity. Like, let her, what do you care? What's the big deal? I think it's just because it like went against the norm to do that, which is I think why she has so much self-hatred, is because she's a little weird and interesting and an out-of-a-box thinker and creative, and people are not always receptive to that because you're told for so long to stay to these rules, do these things, but you don't necessarily have to do anything you don't want to do. And not everything that's set in stone is the way that it has to be. Anyway, she gets kind of fed up that this guy is all mad about the sex because she's like, it wasn't even special. It was just sex. And he just kind of insults her and is like, you're not cool, you know, which is a low blow because he knows that that's kind of, I think what she cares about is this like apathy cool thing, which is why I think she's kind of an asshole. But she just laughs at him while she's smoking and doesn't care. And I think the guy, it's kind of like it's a good grand debate and a good thing for the podcast is like, I think the guy she lost her virginity to thought that like they were in love, like thought it was bigger than it was. And like we're really only seeing stuff from her perspective, so we don't get a side and we don't really get to see like what made him think that, or if he was just like a dude who was like weirdly possessive right away for something. But she thinks that, you know, sex and drugs are just meaningless, two different ways to have, you know, good fun. And she kind of just like calls out the guy where it's like, that's what I know you thought because that's how you treated that night. And you're just mad that I am as a woman acting the same way. So she like makes this like feminist stance to him. He probably was an abuser. We don't really get enough of his story in the film, and I don't remember him a lot in the book because I feel like she writes a lot about her time in like Dallas, and they don't really go into that in the movie. They just kind of stay in the college scene, and I sort of get that because that's probably more of the audience. Like it's for people who are depressed at college. And I do think this is like a good book to read if you are depressed at college. So, you know, it kind of puts things into perspective and it's interesting. But anyway, she feels kind of like she's punished no matter what. And she feels shame that the guy was like, oh, you have no loyalty or whatever. And then she feels like she's just not even allowed to have fun, which can definitely, you know, bring in some depression. But on the bright side, she does get a journalism award for her Lou Reed articles. And she just kind of wishes that she could just freeze the moment where she got that and the high of that and just like erase everything that happened before. There's a lot of cute fashion sense in this movie. It's kind of like cute grunge. So then she sees her dad taking pictures, and she hasn't seen him in a while. And she sees that her dad is with the stepmom, and he wants to know if Elizabeth Wurtzel wants to come back to live with them. And either she or her dad has a totally different hair color, and they're like, yep, I dyed it. And she remembers how he took pictures and has like, she's like on a postcard, and like a postcard that was like super famous and I think made him probably a lot of money. And yet for 4 years she's had like nothing to do with him. And he, you know, is like, this is absolutely what like my dad will like just pop in and just like ask like, oh, what's up with your life now? And it just, they have like no concept of like relationships being a daily thing or at least a more frequent thing, or just doesn't read to them. So in her memories, her dad was like passed out because he was like taking tranquilizers and would like just like sleep through movies. And she's just kind of like, I think, realizing what kind of person her dad is as she's like an adult now and away from her mom, who, you know, obviously has tainted memories of him because she like hates what kind of position her dad put her in. So Elizabeth Wurtzel kind of writes these like wish fulfillment articles and marvels at how her dad made lies seem real. And she kind of is like, maybe they can be if I chose. But she kind of just feels like it's a dream. Like she's like, I'm kind of too old. I don't need him anymore. I met my dad when I was 18. So kind of a similar problem. So she likes loud music to write to probably just block out all of these like weird issues of her, you know, father being like, oh, I'm gonna come back now that you don't need me as much because that's way less pressure than a child, and try to repair it now. And like part of it is like, well, I guess he couldn't have come back at all, so that's something, but it's still like meh. So she'll like listen to this loud music at like 4 a.m., pissing off her roommates. And she's just like, sorry, like, yeah, I'm an asshole, but it helps me concentrate. So this is how I have to like work. She then now loves Springsteen. She thinks he's like a garage mechanic poet. She keeps dirt in her nails to kind of like embrace that grungy Springsteen vibe. And also she's just kind of like not caring about herself because I think she's kind of having a bit of a mental breakdown from her interaction with her father. She starts like not sleeping because she tries to get all these articles perfect, and she starts to get those like crazy eyes from all the insomnia. So she just will like break the papers apart, like rip them and toss them all over the house. And she's like whispering and spinning. I really liked this part of the movie because it was such a interesting transition of her like being this kind of young asshole into like denial that there's a problem into like this really sad unraveling. And she starts to smell because she's not taking care of herself and she's not really valuing her health. And she just feels like, she just like has to finish these assignments, and she is kind of getting obsessive compulsory about them and the way that they have to be. She starts getting into fights and is kind of becoming a Harvard bag lady. And it would be hard, and it is hard if you're going through a mental illness in public, like surrounded by people, and to even be surrounded at the processing of like what her dad did to her mentally and the processing of abandonment there. So she gets really stressed out that she's just going to be like a fading thing, that maybe these are just her peak years. And I mean, here she is, like, this is her peak, and she's like dirty fingernailed, not taking care of herself. And, people tell her to calm down, and that's not helping. And she kind of just like slut shames her friends, where she's just like pushing everyone away. I think just because it's like, I think she feels good in the rise she gets from people. Like, she feels like, oh, I can have an impact even if the impact is bad. So she starts doing cocaine and pot, no more ecstasy. She drinks beers. She does like tranquilizers to come down from the coke. And she doesn't really want to talk to people about it because she wants to hold this like girl of promise image, even though she's choosing to spiral. It was like she can't handle the pressure. I guess it feels like maybe everybody else believes in her and she doesn't believe in herself for whatever reason. And she doesn't take the suggestions of therapy, yet she ends up doing it in the book at some point. And I don't really think we get her therapy journey, which is very, very interesting in the book. And probably at the time this movie was made, not as interesting. I think it could have been. It would definitely be like a challenge to screenwrite for sure. But she kind of adopts this like bad attitude on purpose, and her friends bring her to the hospital where she is like demanding drugs. And I'm just like, the audacity. Like, I've never been to a hospital been like, you got to give me prescriptions. Like, that's insane. If I'm in a hospital, I'm usually like, I just want to get out of here. But yeah, she basically went to the hospital only for pills because she just doesn't like the present way that she's feeling. And she feels like not even writing in Harvard can save her. And she just feels like there's like demons in her head that she can't really see. And one friend finds out that she like blew her friend's boyfriend, like just did like really crappy stuff. I don't know why. Maybe because I feel like this sometimes happens with girls of like, oh, like it becomes this like weird competitive thing, and to see like, oh, can I do it? And maybe she felt like mad that like, why can't I listen to music at 4 a.m.? Like, why can't you get over it? What, like, because she's so selfish. That's like all she can think about is herself. She's become really selfish in her mental illness. So her friend is like so pissed that Elizabeth like is claiming that she gave her boyfriend an accidental blowjob, which was a terrible lie. And she just like follows her around and is like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. And it's just like really weird, like so destructive to like a friend that like legitimately cared about her. And she talks about how her mental illness feels. It's one of my favorite passages in the book too, about how like Ernest Hemingway describes how he went bankrupt. It was like gradually and then suddenly, and that's kind of how she felt about her mental illness and like losing her mind. She was like, it was gradually and then suddenly. And she's not afraid of dying, but she is afraid of living. I don't love all the deliveries on some of this because it gets kind of voiceovery and like trying to be depressed rather than, I feel like, naturally feeling this way. But also, like, Christina Ricci has been pretty rich her whole life. Does she know depression? Maybe. I don't want to just say like depression, it's only for the poor people, but because it's not true. But I just wonder, if she has the capacity to play, because this is some deep mental illness stuff. Like, it's complicated and complex, and yeah. And her mom is really disappointed. She like can't believe that they're all the way back here where, like, when she was younger, where her daughter is just like sleeping in bed, and she feels like, is it because she was like not as overbearing, like that she didn't come see her enough, and she like gave her this independence and knew in the back of her heart that she like wasn't qualified for it, maybe because she had been so overbearing and didn't allow Elizabeth Wurtzel to have a sense of self. And Elizabeth Wurtzel is like, this depression has nothing to do with you. And I think that's like partially true. I think it does have something to do with her mom, but she still like loves her mom and knows her mom is not the whole problem, and knows her mom did the best she could with like very crappy circumstances. And I do think, though, sometimes when you've had a mental illness, like, it sucks because it's like sometimes you do need rest, and this capitalist society of just like go, 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 go constantly, that's not always functional to the human being's body. Elizabeth Wurtzel, after kind of like having just like a hard time with her mom, goes and asks the college for a single room because she just says she's got mental instability and she just can't live with other people. And I'm sure her friend roommate is just, like, you blew my boyfriend, you're awful, and that's not the best place to live. I love Jessica Lange. Jessica Lange is Christina Ricci's mother in this, and she's so good. She's always so compelling, and it's somehow like the same but different. I love Jessica Lange. So freaking amazing. What a time to be alive and experience the acting of Jessica Lange. But Jessica Lange gets the father involved, and she's like, I'm not doing this anymore. I raised her by myself. I have no help from you, and I do everything, and I never get credit, which I don't think is entirely true for her character, but I can understand feeling that way. And all of like Elizabeth Wurtzel's decisions are kind of blowing up in her face, and Jessica Lange gets so mad she like breaks the phone, which is also kind of like a sign that there is definitely some like instability. I understand like divorces are hard, and like love is such a complex emotion, and especially love that's like broken. I don't really love the way this film is filmed or edited. Luckily, Elizabeth Wurtzel has like a pregnancy scale, but she's not pregnant. She's kind of living in like filthy circumstances, and she needs help cleaning it up. I do think that sometimes clutter can reflect the state of the mind, or you're just like busy, and dealing with a mental illness is a full-time job, And Elizabeth Wurtzel just kind of keeps telling her mom, like, she doesn't have a simple solution, and they kind of can't relate to each other, because I think the mom tries to do everything to other people's standards and then is like exhausted, and Elizabeth Wurtzel is just kind of just like given up, and she's working hard, but the time is just difficult. Promises her mom that she'll start taking care of herself and she'll come see her, and she just believes that like what she's doing at Harvard and the writing work she has to finish. And she says, maybe for her birthday, they can have a party, and she can make her pear tarts, and she tries to like give her mom and herself, I think, something to look forward to. And so she goes to the old dorm, because I don't think she got approved for the room, and they're basically, all her roommates are like, hey, we don't want to hang out with you if you're going to drink or do drugs, which was, that'd be so embarrassing. Because I think with her, like, mental instability, it just doesn't, when she parties, it just goes really, really south. And she just then feels like, well, there's no reason to be in the room, and she just closes the door. And she is just becoming exhausted in her dreams, and she feels like she's drowned by a black wave, and she can't write, and just starts looking bored, and just can't even say hi to people, can't be bothered, just like literally hits kind of an apathetic wall. And people are like, Elizabeth, like, you have to talk. There's like no excuse. You can't just like shut down. And she's just like, I guess I'm just like a fucked up, defective model of a human being, And, people think, like, I think with her boyfriend, when she gets Ralphie, she's like fine together, and people will think that she's like faking it, and people are thinking she's just having like a bad day, but she's not, because she's like feeling this way consistently and is unable to kind of shake it by herself, and she doesn't really know what else to say to people. And a lot of people want to help her, but they just don't know what to do or what she needs. It's a company line, but I think is really true. And sometimes too, it's like, the hard thing is, like, for other people to help you, you have to tell them what you need. And if you are struggling with mental illness, sometimes it's hard to communicate what you need. So she gets into a lot of self-pity. That is a lot of the book. I really enjoyed it on my first read, and on my second read, because I'd done, I think, so much mindset work, it was like, geez, But she just feels like her joy is killed, and she's just in this really sad, discouraged place. And, people are like, we really think you need to see like a professional, because this is just not good. And she's like, she just feels like even if she went to therapy, she's just not going to say anything. And she's like, why should I go to a therapy? Like, they're just going to say that I have a desire to sleep with my father, and I don't. And she's like, I don't want to talk about my childhood. She's like, I don't really know even why I'm here on this earth, especially because, and I can like relate to that, and not having parents that are together. I think that's often like a question when you have that like unlove in your creation, and then now you're like created, and it's a really hard thing. I don't even really know how to talk about it as well, because it's like, look, what do you like, you were made a little bit different from some people. And I mean, at least for her, they were like married, so they loved her at least for a moment. But I think she just feels really lost, which is like a common feeling at her age. And she's in like a lot of denial too with other people, because I think she wants people to like, it's so weird, because she like gets panicked when other people think that she's better than she is and have all these expectations on her, but then she like denies that anything is wrong, because she like doesn't want people to stop thinking that about her. She just wants to meet their expectations, but she feels like she can't. So she's still trying to write poems and stories and articles and journals, and she was writing forever for a while, and now she is experiencing writer's block on this poem about her dad, but she still doesn't want to talk about her childhood with her therapist. And she just is like, feels stupid sitting in therapy, because she's like, she knows that other people have had a harder childhood, and she's like, this just means that she's the problem, and how she feels is like, if she's the problem, she should erase it. And I don't think this was done very entertaining, but this concept is very interesting. It's definitely how like I've felt as a person, of like, like people had harder childhoods, and I was probably just the problem in doing it. And it's like, it was so untrue after really doing the work. But when she's in therapy, she's worrying about being in therapy. And when she's not in therapy, she's worried about not being in therapy. So she's just like caught in this like indecisiveness, because I think she just like, it seems like she doesn't truly have a sense of self. Like, there's certain things she likes, and there's definitely like a child that's not willing to grow up, and now is tossed into adult world, so she has to grow up. So she started like cutting herself and self-band-aiding, and just, like keeps going while she keeps bleeding, and her wounds are like helping her go on with life more. And she just wants to function and keep going in the way that she wants to live. There's a cool fade in the background of the train. Then she has her like party with her grandparents. She's drinking champagne by herself. She just wants to shut off her brain and turn off her heart. Here is then when she meets Rafi. I think she's met Rafi like a couple of times, but this is when they start bonding. They make like a joke of like, oh, you're trying to meet girls in the men's bathroom. And she really likes Rafi's like dark hair, brown eyes. And she talks about how like, oh, she threw a party to make her grandparents happy and is now kind of falling in love with this nice Jewish boy. And she feels that Rafi has been appointed to save her life. So she gets into the Rolling Stones magazine, starts being the up and up with him. And she works for Rolling Stone and gets paid work. And she's starting to like fulfill all the promises. And her mom's kind of like bragging to the grandparents. And then she just decides to be like a freaking jerk to her mom. Because she's like, oh, you don't read any of them. Like, you're proud I've accomplished things, but you don't care about it. But I also think, like, I don't need my family to care about everything that I'm doing. Like, if it's not your interest, it's not your interest. That's, like, the thing about being an artist is to just not take it personal. Like, her mom's being supportive, but I don't know. She just uses women, especially as a punching bag, which is maybe something she picked up from her father. So she smokes a cigarette in front of her grandparents who, you know, don't appreciate that. And she's like drunk. And she just says, you know, nothing's wrong. I'm just tired. It's just like causing a scene or an asshole. I definitely feel like she gets a rush from this that she likes. Like there's something that like fuels her by acting out, which maybe she also gets from her dad. Her mom is like all scared for her because she's like, thinks that she's too skinny because she's not taking care of herself and I think eating regularly, and she is like accusing her daughter of being on drugs, and Elizabeth Wurtzel is like, oh, I wish I was on drugs, and that like just sends her mom spiraling because she's like so nervous, and the grandparents are here, and even after that fight the mom like tucks her in. And I just think that honestly she's like such an asshole in this thing, not to speak ill of the dead, but her mom forgives and helps her anyway, which is almost, I feel like, part of the problem is that she's, like, rewarded for being this asshole. Her mom always, like, forgives her and helps her, even though she behaves terribly. And I wonder if that's what happens if she acts out to get that stuff, because maybe normally she doesn't get that stuff, because when you're, like, a normal person, everybody's just like, okay. And then when you're bad, people become, like, over-attentive. And I think that's kind of what's happening here. So she ends up being late to her new jobs, but they're lucky to have her because she's really smart and talented. And while she like likes her job and she's like in love with her boyfriend, but she like calls him all the time. She like is like obsessed in love with Ralphie. And when she hangs up, she just kind of, it's like she kind of like energy sucks for people. Like she needs people to be paying attention to her, or she just feels like she's at the end of her rope and she's working like a lot of extra hours and she never grows out. Just buy any new clothes. She spends all her money on therapy, and her mom is all mad because her dad doesn't pay 1 cent and still like wants to get to know her. And Elizabeth Wurtzel, I guess, thought that her dad was paying for some of it, and her mom is like, no, he's not at all. And because they're like struggling with money, because it's just, I think it would be really hard to afford a Harvard education with 2 parents. I don't think that's cheap at all, even with scholarships. And yeah, she just like keeps making her mom cry. I think those scenes are some of the most interesting of this movie. And her mom starts to kind of blame herself, and she's like, it's my fault for spoiling you. You know, go to Harvard and you come back looking like a zombie. And Elizabeth Wurtzel like even describes, she's like, I'm just doing things like I act like an asshole, but I don't feel like I have control over it, which is like sad, hard. And she just like wants her relationship with her dad to be normal. And then she like shames her mom for having this stupid party, even though it was like her suggestion. And she just like screams at her mom that she's like not her monkey. And then they're like crying. And then immediately she says like, oh, I didn't mean it, which it's like very toxic and weird and messy. But I think like what really happens in relationships with mental illness, I feel like too, she just like, she needs to shout and get this stuff out. And it's like, I don't know if like shouting was like a therapy practice at the time, and she just like, you know, is acting out publicly or having, and I think she gets like maybe overwhelmed with people. If there's like too much people, I think maybe she is an introvert in that way, with like she only can deal with certain people at a time. I think she maybe gets like overstimulated, and she struggles with like a fear of rejection. She's like afraid that Ralphie is going to reject her because he's, you know, going to be a doctor, and she's just like a writer, and she's scared that he will see how crazy she is. And there's some like cool close-ups of the eyes. They're really cool. So she goes to some gigs that she doesn't know where it is, but she comes to see Ralphie because she wants to like be kissed, and like I think sex is like the one way that she feels in her body and feels good. And this sex scene I liked, and I think that's maybe why the others were so porny, because this was when she started to find like an actual good partner. There's some like great music, some good healthy intimacy. Like it borders, it gets a bit crazy after a while. And then she runs into her dad again, who's been cold and distant, and it's says he has paid, but he hasn't written, he hasn't called, and he's mad that like she hasn't put any effort into the relationship, which is, I could understand that pissing her off, because it was like, you walked away, what are you doing? Because she's like asking for more money, because she is, I mean, I don't think she's making a lot as a writer, and I think is consuming a lot as a depressed person. So now she feels she's just like trapped in everything she's hated, and her dad won't pay medical bills, which is what she needs to have therapy. And it's only like 10%, which isn't that much, but the dad is like, well, I lost everything when your mom divorced me. And Elizabeth Wurtzel is like, so what, I'm gonna have to like slit my wrist so I can qualify as a trauma case? And her dad is essentially like killing her because she feels like powerless because she doesn't have money. And I guess she could go try to get a better job, but I don't know, like obviously she's not in the best working condition state. So she talks to Ralphie after that, and, you know, kind of like tries to get, you know, chilled out by his sexual intellectual preppy thing. And she wants to hang out with him for the holidays, but his mom comes to visit, and Ralphie like tries to fit, but he just kind of realizes that it's like this like dancing and drug cheap party scene thing is more her world than his, and he's lost. And she just kind of like gets worried that like he's going to go with other people, probably because of her like parents' divorce, and like the fact too that she was a cheater. And they like fight over like Earl Grey not having milk, and she like thinks that he's fucked somebody, and she like unleashes on him as doing that thing where she like pushes people away and throws this big fit. And, you know, Raffi is like very, very patient and is like, you know, like, I didn't do these things. And Elizabeth Wurtzel is just like, I'm just like so scared you're going to leave. And he's like, I love you. Like, why would I do that? Like, this is just like weird, you know, like you're not making sense. And he likes that she feels so deeply. He thinks that she's incredible. He was very, very sweet to her when she was kind of a bit nasty. And maybe he just like, I think he has sisters and a mom. He's like very, you know, he has females in his life and was obviously raised pretty right. So he kind of maybe just assumes that this is like her on her period or whatever. But she talks about people who would like kill their lovers or eat their lovers, and she's like, oh, now I understand that. Like, that's how I feel for Ralphie. It's like a bit, woo, you know, like, don't, maybe maybe calm down a little bit. But I think her obsession of him allows her to like not deal with the issues of herself. And I think part of that is her mind protecting her, because there is like, once you have the trauma, you have to let it go, and that can be painful, and her body is essentially trying to avoid pain. But she just like starts to love Ralphie so much, you know, she just like wants to like consume him. The stroking of their faces was filmed a bit weird, but I don't know if this film was like an independent or whatever. She believes that her mom is going to love him, but he's like, I can't go with the holidays, because he's like, something came up with my mom and I need to go home. And she's like, no, I need you to be with me. And he's like, well, I can't be two places at once. You know, I have to help with my mom and move apartments. So it's like a complicated situation, because his like sister, I think too, is like in a home, like has some sort of disability, and I think she wants to go with him, but she's like, oh no, I'm uneasy with strangers, so I just want you to like come be with my mom so I can like show you off, and I think prove to her mom that she's doing better, and maybe then, or at least maybe get his opinion on her mom's relationship, which I could understand, but she's not like explicitly saying that, just kind of like beating around the bush that she just like wants him. And he, you know, is like, you know, like I am sorry, you know, I'm here for you, I love you, and I want to help. And she's like, you know, you are helping. And he's like, you know, I'm going to see you next term, you know, travel isn't just easy. And he's like, you know, I will help you be strong. And they kiss goodbye, and she needs a therapist and needs kind of like more reassurance than Raffi, I think, can possibly humanly provide her. So she's like kind of stuck on the payment aspect. So she helps her mom, who's in like this new apartment, new location. They're putting things away. They haven't made dinner. And, you know, she's like vowing in her head that she's going to help pay her mom back one day, because her mom basically gave up a bunch of stuff, I think, to help her. I also realized that Michelle Williams was her friend Ruby, who she like blew the boyfriend. Michelle Williams is a total chameleon. And of course, this is kind of when she starts ruining the relationship, because she calls Ralphie like 10 times. She drives him crazy, and it's making him mad. And she like even calls his mom and is like, tell him it's busy. And she's like mad that he's not picking up his phone, and he's like, this is like becoming crazy, I can't do this my whole life. And she's drinking, she drinks some whole wine in one gulp, and she is like, I don't know that you're like laying awake missing me the way that I'm missing you. She's like super insecure, and she's like, she just is like, she's like, I really love this person. It's also very interesting because there's like cigarettes being smoked in buildings, which was like, I feel like such a different time than right now, But she's like, her love for Ralphie feels like real love. Like it feels like total life and death. And when we're apart, she feels apart, and she doesn't like believe that anybody else could have felt the same way. Like she's so immature with that. It just feels like, I don't know, like a child who doesn't understand that other people exist, or that we're more similar than we are different. She's just like such a kind of one of those girls who's like, I'm different. I'm not the same as other girls. I'm different. She just like is stuck in there. And Raffi's pretty sad because it's like, he's like, wow, I can't imagine how incredibly painful it must be to be. And it's insane that she is so mean and still has friends, but she goes to the airport to see him physically, and she like then tells her mom to let know it's okay. And he like doesn't want her to come, he's like, it's not a good idea. And she's like, well, if you love me, you'll let me come. And she thinks that he's like cheating again, because I don't know what her trauma is with that, but it's really bad. And then he is like, listen, like my sister is like mentally handicapped. Like, I have to deal with this. This is not a good time. And this poor dude is like, so now he's trapped, like struggling with his sister who's going through this thing, and now has like a girlfriend who's also like super needy. And it's totally like such a Ralphie thing. Like, of course he got involved with somebody like Elizabeth Wurtzel, and that's why he's like sticking around and doing all of these things. And she's like mad that he hid about his sister, and he believes like, that she gets off on this, and he just like doesn't really know what he's going to do, and he tries to like comfort her, and she thinks that he likes that she's like all wounded and stuff, and kind of shames him for that, and which is so mean, and is like, oh, you like taking care of me and being wounded because like this is all you know. And it was like, well, why can't that be a good thing? Like, that's what he knows, and he's being a good man because he's like, oh, this is like this is my purpose in life, is to like take care of people. And instead she gets like all pissed at him. And I think part of it is like, no one will satisfy her because she doesn't like herself. Like, she's just insanable. She doesn't like anything. She doesn't like life. She just like is in this mental illness. But anyway, she calls him a creep for just like liking misery, and just like shames him. And like, he shouldn't have lied to her. And I could understand that like causing crazy, because I think that women really do have like a sense of intuition. That's before, but I also kind of understand like, oh, I don't want her to like freak out about this, or like not knowing what it was. Like, he wasn't right. I don't really know what his thing was to lie. Like, maybe he's had past trauma about like how people treat his sister, and like maybe he thought that he wouldn't be like her perfect guy. And he was like, like, I did make a mistake. And he's like, but sometimes it just, people aren't ready to tell everyone like the extent of the problems, and it's just like more about them than you. And she like then has to like figure out how to get back, because they're like, she told her mom that her and Ralphie were having some problems, and that it's been really hard patching things up. And he's like, he loves me, but he's got weird family stuff, and it's hard to help them and help me and help himself. And he's just like, Elizabeth, like, this isn't working, and please don't call. And she's just like, what's not working is my life. Like, she's like, I don't want this. And she's just devastated. It's insane the amount of drugs these freshman girls are doing in this college. And she just tries to like party and have fun. And then she ends up just like in the hospital because she has taken so many pills, and this like breakup just kind of, I think, sent her over the edge. And then, they break it down, and they're like, listen, you've still made progress from like honestly where you started. It's all going to amount to something, all of this pain. And she feels like very betrayed by Ralphie, like that he didn't really love her because he just like broke up so easily. But I also kind of understand why he broke up, because she was just kind of acting insane. And I think like sometimes you say something and you hurt somebody and you can't take it back no matter how much you wish you would. And that's what he did. And I think he also did kind of wake up and realize his own patterns of like, oh, I'm taking care of my mom and my sister, which is more than most people ever do. So I deserve somebody who's going to like take care of me too, and not just like another person who's going to treat me like crap. So they push drugs on her, and she then takes all of the drugs, and then she's in the hospital, and her head is like moving, but there's like stillness at the same time. And it really does kind of feel that way in the hospital. I don't know how to describe it. Just like watch the film for this part, and that's how it'll go. And they kind of believe that she was like too close to her therapist. Poor Jessica Lange, her mom got mugged and like stole her purse, so that's like awful too. So it's now like extra bad. And she's like sitting in the hospital when her mom gets mugged. And so I think she still kind of feels terrible and is also just kind of recognizing the responsibility that she has to get better because she has to be there for her mom, kind of learning something from Ralphie. And then she has to go to New York and she goes by herself because I don't think her mom can come, or her mom has to go to New York, and then she just doesn't go. And her mom is like, listen, like I'm done helping you. Like I can't do it anymore. She's like, this has to end, there's always going to be some other crisis. And so that kind of makes her spiral even more. And her mom, even after the mugging, refuses pain-killing drugs. And Elizabeth Wurtzel is like, how can we even be related? Because I think she's definitely like an addict, and that the book doesn't like super go into that label, but I think this movie really plays it up like that. So she helps her mom get back home, and she just doesn't feel like she knows what she's doing, and she feels like there's just like no tears. And she feels like her mom having to rely on her is such like a cruel joke. And everyone is telling her that she looks better, but she feels so tired and she feels like there's no reason for her to go back. So then it's exams, and she tells her mom, like she's got to take care of herself, and her mom always has. And her mom is like, very thankful that her daughter went and helped. She was like, I don't know how she would have done it without her, but also she feels responsible because her mom would have even been like working or living in that neighborhood or worrying about money if it wasn't for Lizzie. And her grandma kind of calls their granddaughter's behavior out. And her grandma has a conversation with her mom about how, like, yeah, it's great that Elizabeth took care of you, but she's not good, right? Like, she's still not there yet. Like, kind of wake up, which is, like, hard to hear, but necessary. And then her mom opens up to Elizabeth, about how, like, when she was a child and her dad left, she was so little and you needed me. And she, like, had to take care of her, and in a way that like brought her back to life because she felt like everything that mattered was wrapped up in her child. And I think this is probably how a lot of single moms feel, because that's like pretty much like why they kept going even when things seemed impossible. And she says like taking care of Lizzie forced her to pay attention again, and she just felt like that Elizabeth was so full of promise and she wanted so much for her. And sometimes she had to, like, take breaks because she wanted so much. That's why, like, she sent her to summer camp, because in the books and in a little bit of this movie, she talks about how, like, oh, summer camp was some of, like, the worst times of her life. And I think, like, she just felt being, like, sent away and, like, I don't know, that she didn't, like, matter because obviously her dad wasn't taking her. Because that's a lot to do, like, no cost errand. Just to do it all by herself is a lot. And she admits that, in her smothering, she couldn't see, like, when that wasn't good for her. And there's just this very relatable, beautiful moment of Elizabeth opening up, and it was like, you want me to be everything? And she's like, I can't. I can't be. And she's like, it was just kind of, everything was so overbearing. I had no personality. I could come to no conclusions on my own. And her mom is like, you don't have to pretend to be well for me. And she's like, no, I'm going to be okay. I promise. And her mom only kind of half believes it. And so she goes to the doctor and is like getting pills. And she's like, this is so weird that I'm like getting pills for this mental illness. And it feels like it's a crack house, but everybody's doctor is dealing. And she does like kind of this iconic thing. It's the title of the Prozac Nation, the United States of Depression. And she feels like she's becoming a different person on the medication, and she's not quite comfortable on who this person is yet, but the pills kind of give her some breathing space. That's not like total apathy or like just a downward spiral. And she feels that the pills cover up everything of how it feels. Problem is like when they're not covering up, all the feelings like spill into everything. And she has this like moment where she's talking about that to her therapist, and then she like panics and she like goes into the therapist's bathroom, who has like a bunch of glass and pills in it, which is very weird. I don't know what therapy office would have that, but maybe it's just like a filmmaking thing of what they have. But she like breaks the glass and is like overtaking on her medicine, and she like basically commits a suicide attempt in her doctor's office, which is like insane, but it's like a beautiful moment. And the therapist is like a kid that even sees her, which makes the whole situation even worse. And the suicide attempt made her feel like kind of like the worst person in the world, and she just like, even though she knew trying to commit suicide was wrong, she did it anyway, and that like was like making her even more crumble. So she has to go get another therapist. She gets put on different drugs, and she figures out how to figure out her anger and guilt, and goes part of the recovery process. You know, there's no cure-all, but she starts writing again, not as if her life depended on it. And then 7 years later, she basically kind of just wrote about her mental illness journey. And 7 years later, this book, Prozac Nation, became published. And there's 300 million at the time. I think this was in the 90s, so it's probably more now. But there's 300 million prescriptions for Prozac. I have a lot of feelings about antidepressant medication. I'm personally not on them. I have a very kind of messed up situation from them. It does not bode well for me that she had breast cancer, and like maybe that's unrelated, but I think that antidepressant medication can be super dangerous, and I feel like they handed out like freaking Tic Tacs, and I don't love that. And that is no shame if you take antidepressant medication. I do believe some people need it. Some people, you know, like, we're all just trying to get through. There's no shame in that. I just think that the industry itself needs to be investigated more. And I don't know if they should just put children on it like they do. But those are just my opinions, right? And I'm learning more every day. But yep, that was Prozac Nation. What did you guys think? Have you read the book? What did you think of the book as well? I used to love the story, and now the story is just kind of like meh to me, because I've done a lot of the hard work and mental work and self-love work, so that it's hard to kind of go back to these depression stories. And it's like, I remember feeling this way, but I haven't felt this way in such a long time that, you know, it's just like I'm different now, and I don't relate as much as I used to these feelings, and it feels a bit silly when they occur. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and listening. Please let me know what you thought below, what you thought of this review. And thanks so much for your time and attention. Have a good rest of your day. And yeah, please don't kill yourself. Please take your meds. If you are taking some, take them responsibly. And you deserve to be on this earth. Goodbye. Have a good one.